Hello, this is Bill Turner again, still in Oklahoma City, still in Okie, still not a modal Okie, still having a Ph.D. in U.S. history from Vanderbilt, still having a J.D. from the University of Wisconsin. By the way, if you're looking for really high quality production values, you're in the wrong place, okay? I'm a lot better with text than I am with video. Video is not my medium. I'm only making videos because video seems to be the medium everybody likes these days. And I have to admit that it seems to be pretty obvious. Ranting and raving on video is it's fun. It's a fun thing to do. I apologize for the fact that that I'm not making the obligatory video sitting in the driver's seat of my car. I don't plan to make one of those. It seems obvious to me that making videos in your car is not a good idea. At least, please, if you're gonna make a video in your car and not survive it, please park the car first, okay? I mean, this business of driving down there. Right now, here in Oklahoma, we have a conservative, good Christian conservative. It's hard to be conservative in the sense of being a good Christian, um, who's who has some appointed function with respect to public education in the state of Oklahoma. Is running for the state's elected superintendent of education position, has promised if he gets elected to the state's leading public education position to reject all federal funds for education, which for the state of Oklahoma, which is a titanically stupid thing to do, and it has that I can tell has no opinions whatsoever to divulge specifically with respect to public education, but does want to talk about being anti-woke all the time. He's very very big on all he can talk about. He's a good Republican. I can just repeat the Republican boogeyman. Oh, where he's anti-woke, he's anti-woke. Happily, he does seem to be losing. We can hope he will lose. But he's real big on making videos in the driver's seat of his car. That's one of his favorite things to do. That's about apparently as near as I can tell, that's all he does. But he gets paid a salary as he appointed some education official in the state of Oklahoma, appointed by the Republican idiot governor. And he also gets a salary from somebody else, which is double dipping and probably in the other in a clear, in this case, a clear violation of conflict of interest rules. But he's a Republican; he doesn't care about the rules. Which gets my key issue here again, as it was last time, is how is it possible? I mean, it's a sad state in our society that you can be absolutely just as dumb as a post and still have a platform and a non-trivial audience of people who are willing to listen to you, as long as you say you're a conservative, whatever that means. Good question, exactly what it means to be conservative. As I said yet last time, it is true that there's in various parts of Western culture, there are people who have made have solid reputations and have articulated serious philosophical positions that we can understand as being conservative in some country message. It's still kind of, even if they're serious about it, it's still kind of silly because to be conservative is in some sense to express opposition to change, and change is the one thing that we can't avoid in human existence. Everything changes all the time, so you're stuck with change. I mean, the only question is whether you can take the conservative position is to see something they've never seen before and say, "Hey, gross, go away, kill it before it kills us," which is dumb. Kind of the way that the attitude Christians took when they invaded the Americans, started killing Native Americans before they bothered to try to find out anything about Native Americans. The liberal attitude is say, "Oh, look, here's something I've never seen before. Let me see if I can safely investigate it and explore it, and see if I can figure out how it works before see if I can figure out how it works. Figure out, especially with respect to people. Oh, here's a person I don't know. Let me go over and talk to that person, see if I can figure out who this person is." I mean, it's not reasonable to assume that just because you don't know somebody, they're going to try to kill you. But that's conservative attitude. Boy, she better shoot him before he shoots me. Which is why conservatives like guns. Conservatism, it's difficult to be a good conservative in the United States because, after all, as we discussed before, the Constitution of the United States is a distinctively liberal document, and in very many ways, the United States the basic culture of the United States is distinctly liberal. Now, we don't always live up to that very well. Obviously, there's nothing very liberal about having slavery and racial segregation. And we were stuck with that because of conservatism. Most of the real conservatives in colonial America got up and left screaming either to Canada or back to England if they could the minute the Declaration of Independence arrived, because real conservatives in the Anglo-American tradition anyway are monarchists. And the Declaration of Independence was basically a statement that we're gonna blow off, we're gonna get rid of the king. We're not gonna allow ourselves to be governed by the King of England anymore, or the monarchy, or English government at all. So bye bye English government. We're gonna create our own government. Thank you very much. And that, of course, was anathema to conservatives. So conservatives all left, and so that left in colonial America the closest we had to conservatives were the slave owners. So this is embedded racism as a basic component of conservatism in the United States. It seems obvious to me. As he said yesterday, last time we talked about William F. Buckley, he said, I'm a man standing athwart history, yelling, stop, which is a preposterous, completely ridiculous claim. I mean, just idiotic in the extreme. Nobody can stand athwart history. You can yell stop all you want to at history. History doesn't care. You know, Francis Fukuyama, who's, I don't know where he falls on the ideological spectrum, but anyway, he wrote like years ago, oh, at the end of history. Guess that didn't work out. Huh. Well, anyway, history keeps boiling on whether you like it or not. And the only question is whether you take an intelligent attitude and say, here, let me investigate and see what's going on, or you can stop your foot and throw a see-fit temper tantrum and try to stop whatever change is going on. So Buckley was an advocate, continued to advocate the perpetuation of racial segregation in the United States long after every other sane thinking person, thinking white person, because black people always knew racial segregation is bad. After sane thinking white people had all given up on racial segregation, said, okay, we need to stop doing this. Before the Civil Rights Act, but the momentum is well on the way to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But so, you know, and Buckley's just, please, just stop it here. But the problem then becomes, how do you, now, some so-called conservatives in the United States denominate themselves, I'm a classical liberal, because they try to pretend that they have a better understanding of what the Constitution means, and they're trying to adhere to a sort of older, you know, understanding of what the Constitution was. You know, I don't know that Anderson Scalia was pretty frankly conservative because he's a good Catholic. But he was also in some ways for example, he himself would say about himself, he was a huge defender, especially of the Fourth Amendment. He's a big Bill of Rights guy, because of course he was saying that, you know, the point being, and this is reasonably consistent. You can say, okay, I'm going to be conservative, so I'm going to defend the Constitution, and of course that begs the question of what do you think the Constitution means, and you have a relatively conservative and relatively liberal position on that question. But the problem is you're still stuck in that weird position of being conservative, explicitly and emphatically defending a liberal Constitution, because it is the founding document, at least in terms of our politics, and our politics obviously are an important part of our culture. So you end up being a conservative who wants to defend the traditions of the culture as it stands, even when the culture as it stands is in some ways distinctly liberal. So, you know, what's a poor conservative to do? I don't know because I'm not a conservative. And that may be part of the reason why conservatives are so dumb. But really, unfortunately, nowadays it's becoming increasing. It seems to me anyway. I have a very hard time avoiding the conclusion that a lot of so-called conservatives in the United States these days have decided that because we now interpret the Constitution, especially as since 1954 or so, to mean specifically that our Constitution requires equal opportunity, equal treatment for African Americans, which, as far as I'm concerned, it does, and very clearly does, especially since the 14th and 15th Amendments. But and then more so, not but fairly enacted under the Constitution, the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. That if our Constitution requires us to treat African Americans equally, then they don't like the Constitution anymore. And we see this whining and so many examples all over the place. I mean, I couldn't even begin to list all the examples of people saying, well, you know, conservatives now coming around and saying they don't like the Constitution, but conservatives objecting to various elements of the Constitution. You know, at some level, being a conservative saying, I'm going to be a conservative in the United States, I'm going to defend the Constitution, that, I mean, I can see that. That kind of makes sense. But being a conservative and implicitly criticizing all these components of the Constitution all the time is just dumb. Now, in some ways, the epitome of this position, although not really, is Donald Trump. Now, the problem with using Donald Trump as the epitome of this position, so I think Donald Trump's problem is he's just too stupid to understand he doesn't really understand what a constitution is, and he doesn't really understand anything about what our constitution says. He famously, a couple of years ago, said that, well, while he was still president, while he was playing at being president. Now, I actually am working on an essay where I argue that Donald Trump was never really president of the United States, that he played at being president of the United States, but he basically lacked the mental qualities that we need in order to truly be president of the United States. And contrasting him, say, with even Ronald Reagan, who was in some notional sense, Reagan was really more libertarian than was conservative. But anyway, um, um, Reagan, who was an actor before he became president, he's actually an actor, not a reality TV star. Reagan and Trump had a lot in common, but Reagan at least had been governor of California before he became president of the United States, and ran for president twice. He ran in '76 and ran again in 1980 when he won. And he emphatically said that he couldn't understand how anybody could be president of the United States without having been an actor first, because he understood that part of being president of the United States is because the president of the United States combines, there's two roles here: head of government and head of state. So the French have a president who's the head of government, and a prime minister who's the head of state, right? So the English have the king who's the head of government, head of state, and the prime minister is the head of government. So government and the state are very closely intertwined, but they're distinct things. And so being the head of state is being the sort of the figurehead, the sort of, and this is part of the thing that conservatives really didn't like about having a black president, is the fact that the president is supposed to embody, sort of be the father of the nation, right? Going back to George Washington, the father of our country, right? And I mean, in some level, there's a way in which that really doesn't work because it's basically inherently kind of a conservative idea. Not everybody gets along very well with their fathers, and some people don't have a father, and and we don't, and of course, the funny thing about this is the conservatives are also now stuck with, oh, we don't like mom, they don't like the nanny state. They don't like a maternalistic government, because they prefer a paternalistic government, which is part of the reason why conservatives are perfectly happy with banning abortion, because banning abortion means taking rights away from women. So anyway, but um, Donald Trump never, Donald Trump is apparently a really bad father. Look at his, oh my God, I feel so sorry for poor Ben and having that man's father. I don't even think about that. Anyway, so Donald Trump just was never, no. I mean, I think about my father compared to Donald Trump. No, Donald Trump, I don't, I don't necessarily get along real well with my father, but at the same time, I'm much happier with the father I had than I don't. Donald Trump allegedly has a lot more money than my father does, but I don't care. I was comfortable growing up, had everything I needed and most of what I wanted. And my father made more money than most, and I'm perfectly, rather have my father than Donald Trump's father any day of the week. Donald Trump was never going to be obviously Barack Obama's not my father either, because I mean, I have not gotten my DNA checked. I don't plan to have my DNA checked. If you want to get your DNA checked, knock yourself out. I think it's kind of fascinating. I understand the fascination, especially I understand it's used for people who are studying genealogy, especially African Americans doing genealogical research, are really finding out a lot of interesting stuff by having their DNA checked. I don't care. But I mean, obviously I look as white as they come. I was joking, I'm so white and practically transparent. But I just assume, I'm not a lot of Southern ancestors. I just assume there's some African back there somewhere. There just is. I don't care. That's fine with me. I don't mind having some black ancestry. But I don't have, my black ancestry is much farther in my past than Barack Obama's father's black. My father's, again, is as white as I am, although his hair is pretty dark brown, but black. But anyway, it's almost around now 'cause he's old. But back when he had hair, his hair was pretty much black. But anyway, um, but Donald Trump just never, he was never really played the role correctly. And the one key difference between Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan was Ronald Reagan knew how to act like president, and Donald Trump never did grasp that basic concept of how to act like president. He was a lousy president in absolutely every single respect. Ronald Reagan was a lousy president in most ways, but one of the ways he was good at being president was he was good at being the head of state. He was good at being figurehead for the country. Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump was never a good figurehead. But Donald Trump literally said at one point, I have Article 2, which tells me I can do whatever I want. You mean, so, which betrays a complete misunderstanding of what the Constitution is all about. Almost any constitution, really, because any constitution, in some level, if you have a constitution, you're necessarily placing some sort of limits on the government. Because the whole point of a constitution is, if a group of people sit down and say, okay, here's how we want our constitution to, how we want our government to function, and here's what we want it to do. That's what our constitution does. That's what any kind. I mean, what else is a constitution going to do? Our constitution says, okay, here's how it defines that. Article 1 defines Congress. Article 2 defines the executive branch. And Article 3 defines the judicial branch, which are the basic components for how the federal government, what does all the business of the federal government takes place under one of the three branches. Now, there's the administrative state, but the administrative state is created by Congress and run by the president, so it still operates under between, sort of at the intersection of Article 1 and Article 2. So Donald Trump says thinks just because so I mean, it's just bizarre if you stop and think about how weird it is to say, I have an office that's specifically divided a specific document, but I get to do whatever I want. No, you don't. The whole point of the Constitution was to create a government that's significantly more powerful than its predecessor under the Articles of Confederation, which were too weak and didn't allow the federal government, essentially, if there was a federal government, there barely was one, to do what needed to be done. And so people like George Washington, James Madison, various other rich, powerful slave owner people, and some non-slave, John Adams, some non-slave owner people, Benjamin Franklin, agreed that we needed a much stronger federal government, central government. So they got together and had the Constitutional Convention, which did not actually have the authority to write a whole new Constitution, but they did it anyway. They just jumped in and did it. So anyway, so the Constitution is supposed to create a much more powerful government than its predecessor, but it's still supposed to be limited. The power of every aspect of the federal government is supposed to be limited. And he clearly does not understand the concept of, especially like separation of powers and the checking and balances functions of the way in which all of the branches are supposed to check the other two branches. So obviously, the federal judges can just strike down legislation. Bam, the Congress can pass it, the president signs it, the federal judge says, yeah, I know this violates the Constitution. Bam, it's gone, at least until Any individual federal judge can issue a national ban on enforcing any statute subject to appeal, and the appeals court or the Supreme Court might reverse the trial judge. But at least there's in principle. But then, of course, the Supreme Court is still in the third. It's still in the same branch of government. It's still the judicial branch, and the judicial branch can find invalidate Congress. Doesn't matter how large the majority is in Congress. Doesn't matter if the president signs a bill or not. Congress and the president can agree on a bill and make it a law, and the Supreme Court can, the courts can still ultimately say, yeah, no, sorry, it violates the Constitution, you can't do that. Um, and the president obviously has a lot of power to do various things, and that has the president gets to choose federal judges. The federal judge, it is simply there seems to be a broad line the idea that federal judges do whatever the president appoints and wants them to do. Clearly, for example, in the debacle case down in Florida, where Trump found a compliant trial judge who was willing to intercede in a case she shouldn't have been interceded in, and proceeded to appoint a special master to review all these documents that shouldn't be done. That at least at this stage of the game are not. I mean, so yes, of course, it is true. And the FBI is already, insofar as the FBI admits, okay, whoops, we got these passports that belong to Donald Trump. Let's give them spam. The passports are not relevant to anything. The only reason they took them is because they showed it was relevant to where they found the documents that they took away, and they're like, okay, we'll give them passports back. And of course, apparently a couple of them were expired anyway. But still, the point is, they've given him back the things that clearly that they don't need for the investigation that belong to him, and they've done that. Now, as usually in the course of criminal prosecution, what happens is if you get indicted, and of course Donald Trump has not yet been indicted. Let's hope he gets indicted soon because he deserves to be indicted. But anyway, if once you get indicted, then you can go through the process of saying, "Wait a minute, you got to give me back the stuff of mine that you took that you shouldn't have." But he decided to try to accelerate that process and go find another judge who was not involved in the original. The Judge Cannon did not have anything to do with signing. She's not the one who signed the warrant. She had nothing to do with the case until they took the case to her and said, here. And she basically admits that she wasn't supposed to be involved in that. So now we have, and they're trying to appeal to the Supreme Court. I don't think the Supreme Court's going to take this case to the Supreme Court. So I don't have anything to do with this. I gotta go away, go far away, get away from me. Ew. But anyway, the three-judge panel, which is standard for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Ordinarily, if you can appeal any decision by a federal trial judge by right to the relevant court of appeals. And usually the first step is to have what's called a panel, which is just three judges picked more or less at random, as far as I know, from the appeals court to hear the appeal. The most recently, the Department of Justice appealed pretty much the whole puppy, the entire shebang of Judge Cannon's stupid original order appointing Judge Jury and the whole bit to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And the three-judge panel in the 11th Circuit of Appeals said, yeah, no, this is bullshit. Shouldn't be. None of this should be happening at all. And two of those judges were Trump appointees. So it is simply false that the presidents always get what they want out of judges. The most famous example of this, of course, is Chief Justice Earl Warren, who presided over a lot of the extremely liberal decisions of the 50s and 60s. That the ones especially establishing the idea that the Constitution requires equal treatment for African Americans, starting with Brown versus Board of Education, and continuing through a lot of other decisions. And Dwight Eisenhower, Republican president, appointed him, and allegedly Dwight Eisenhower was alleged to have said that appointing Earl Warren was the biggest mistake he ever made as president of the United States. I disagree. I think it was a great appointment, and Earl Warren did a lot of really good work. But then, of course, I think African American equality is how could you argue with that? But anyway, so Donald Trump thinks that because the second Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president unlimited power. No, it doesn't. The whole thing about definitions, right? You define something, but inherently you necessarily, in some sense, limited. You say, okay, that over there is a tree. That means it's not a bush. It's not a flower. It's not an animal. It's a plant. It's not grass. It's a tree. And so, but when you define something, you say what it is. But if you say what it is, you also say what it isn't. If you are president of the United States, and that gives you a lot of power, there's no doubt the president of the United States is an enormously powerful position. Unfortunately, with Donald Trump illustrated, the basic problem with the president of the United States now is that it's extremely difficult. You can't anticipate. After Nixon left office, the Congress passed a bunch of statutes to try to limit the power of the presidency. Mr. Nixon's crazy. Next time if we ever another crazy president, we're going to try to prevent him from being as crazy and doing as much harm as Richard Nixon did. The problem was there was no way in hell anybody was going to anticipate anybody as crazy as Donald Trump. I mean, the founders, like, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison's heads would explode if they could see Donald Trump being president of the United States. They're like, no way in hell. This man should not be president. He's not qualified to be president. He has zero qualifications. He's dumb as a post. He's crazy as a loon. He should not be president of the United States. but he got in, and he unfortunately now has post World War II powers. Happily, he didn't nuke anybody, and he also is too dumb to figure out this. I think this should. But when the minute the man won the presidency, I thought, the saving grace of Trump being president is he's too stupid to figure out how to use the presidency, power of the presidency, as effectively as somebody who's smart could. And this is people saying, and Ron DeSantis never be president of the United States, but what people are saying about Ron DeSantis is that he's as crazy as Donald Trump, but he's smarter. Which, yeah, I think that's probably true. And also he's been governor of a state. Now he's obviously governor of a state right now. And so he knows better how, unlike Nixon obviously spent 8 years as Dwight Eisenhower's vice president. So Nixon was crazy, but Nixon was smart. The difference between one of the key differences between Nixon and Trump was that they're both crazy, but Nixon was smart and crazy, and Trump is dumb and stupid and crazy. So really the dumbest thing Trump did in terms of his desire to continue to be president, which I'm so glad he's not president anymore. But anyway, the biggest dumb move that Donald Trump made in terms of his desire to continue to be president was he failed to invade Iran by John Bolton on staff, and he can blame it on John Bolton because John Bolton never saw a war he didn't like. John Bolton probably wanted to invade Iran, and why John Bolton didn't argue more strongly in favor of invading Iran, I don't know. Invading Iran, by the way, would be a complete fucking disaster. It's a really, really bad idea. I'm not saying I think we should invade Iran. What I'm saying is, if Donald Trump is willing to remain president for a second term, the best way he could have gone about doing that would have been to invade Iran, because the public generally rallies behind a president in times of foreign policy crisis. Now, this was a foreign policy crisis entirely the U.S. making him. We didn't have any good reason to invade Iran, but when did that ever stop us? We didn't have any good reason to invade Iraq or Afghanistan either, but that didn't stop the previous Republican president from doing it. So, but anyway, so Donald Trump's really lost his opportunity there. But anyway, so, yeah. So Donald Trump, the problem with Donald Trump is not that he doesn't understand the Constitution. He's not necessarily a very good example of Republican conservatives not liking the Constitution. But more recently, for example, this whole Dunham investigation that just got another acquittal. Here's Devin Nunes out here whining about alleging Devin Nunes, talk about a dumb conservative, um, out here whining about how it's impossible for good conservatives to get fair trials. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, by the way. I know it's very fashionable. It's very fashionable these days to talk about, wail about how horrible Twitter, what a cesspool Twitter is, and how horrible it is. Why are you using Twitter? I like Twitter. I think Twitter's really interesting. I really like following reporters and finding out what reporters will often post what they're reporting on Twitter in addition to the article that they actually wrote, which is kind of redundant, but it's fun with me. I don't mind doing that because I like finding out what reporters are saying apart from what they publish in the articles. But anyway, so here's Devin Nunes out here. I think he's talking actually about the Steve Bannon trial. But anyway, the Durham trial, of course, that Durham investigation was a complete disaster, complete waste of time. Really, really dumb. But anyway, and he got one measly conviction of a low person that didn't really expose what there's a secret. But they're still on about this idea that there's some sort of secret, cabal inside the FBI that's out to get Republicans. But anyway, now Steve Bannon just got sentenced to a term in jail and a fine for refusing to comply with a subpoena from Congress. Which, hello, I mean, hello, sorry, I mean, we understand you don't like the administrative state. Tough. Congress is not the administrative state. Obviously, Congress creates the administrative state, but Congress is, in fact, the duly and according to the Constitution. I guess Steve Bannon apparently doesn't like the U.S. Constitution either. He's the one who said early on, insofar as Trump had no himself had no political philosophy at all that I can discern, because Donald Trump doesn't understand philosophy and doesn't understand politics. But anyway, but insofar as he had any political philosophy, it came from Steve Bannon, who apparently originally said that he wanted to tear the whole thing down and start over again. Okay, why? I don't know. Seems to me the Constitution is functioning pretty well. It did, of course. The Constitution is the other key thing to keep in mind about this is the Constitution is the only reason Donald Trump ever got to be president at all. Because without the Constitution, we wouldn't have the Electoral College, and the Electoral College is what allowed Donald Trump to become president. So Donald Trump is so dumb. Right, he's not necessarily the person. We don't know what Donald Trump thinks about the Constitution. I think Donald Trump thinks about the Constitution. Well, he doesn't understand it. But anyway, Steve Bannon apparently doesn't like the Constitution, even though he has 15 minutes. He said, "Wherever, sit down, Steve. You're wherever 15 minutes." He got convicted some time ago, and he's just gotten sentenced as a result of the conviction to some time in jail and a fine for having defied a subpoena of Congress. This is a real no-brainer. Yes, he's guilty, and yes, but Devin Nunes out here. Well, it's impossible for a good conservative to get a fair trial in any major city because all major cities are full of a bunch of damn liberals who are going to be eager to convict a conservative. Well, just stop. The Constitution clearly provides that, it says that you get a jury trial and a jury of your peers, and it also says that you shall be prosecuted in the locality where the crime occurred. Now, it's kind of difficult in the case, I mean, how do you say, well, when he defied the subpoena, he was probably sitting on his butt in California or wherever he lives, but the subpoena originated in Washington, D.C., so that's where the trial took place. So, and the point is, okay, the people who wrote the Constitution had no concept of how geographically large the United States would become and how large the population of the United States would become, and they had no concept of they didn't like parties at all. They didn't like political parties. They had no idea how ideologically polarized we become in the future. But at the same time, their idea was that the people at the locality where the crime occurred should be the people to evaluate the guilt or innocence of the defendant. Which, I mean, this seems like this is actually conservative. So one of the other things about the problem we have in the United States is people confuse conservatives with libertarians. And conservatives and libertarians both are concerned about a big, large federal government. This started during the New Deal when the federal government grew enormously in World War II. The best way it's funny because Republicans want to like war, but they also supposedly like small government. Which, sorry guys, it is impossible. The best way to increase the size and power of any government is to have a war. So if you like wars, you're gonna have to like big government. But anyway, so it is true that the size and power of the federal government expanded dramatically starting with the New Deal, but especially after World War II. The Patriot Act, the Republican idea. But anyway, so we confuse conservatives and libertarians because they agree on being suspicious of a large, powerful federal government, but for very different reasons. Libertarians are generally sort of the principle is that a large, powerful government is more likely to trample on your liberties, which is, I mean, that's not wrong on its face. I mean, libertarianism is still it's elegant in principle, and in practice, it routinely falls bam flat on its face. But conservatives don't like a large, powerful federal government anywhere in the United States because in their opinion, government should be as close to the people who governs as possible. Which, okay, again, I'm just saying. Although it's funny, of course, conservatives love local government until they don't. So now all of a sudden, these days, the contest is more not so much between the federal government and state governments as between states and cities. Where in cities, unfortunately, unlike states, do not have any independent historical or intellectual basis for declaring any sort of independence from the supervening government, right? So the states are the ones who created the federal government. The federal government, in some sense, is a creation of the state governments, the states that created it. And it is true that states have independent claim to important political and administrative functions that we should keep. I mean, I'm not having a problem with states. Let's keep states. It doesn't make any sense for the federal government to try to make snow claim policy for both Minnesota and South Carolina because they have, that's just, you need a lot more snow clearance equipment in Minnesota than you do in South Carolina or in Georgia. For example, I lived in Minnesota and I lived in Georgia. And it was limited. Last time I was limited, land it snowed 1 inch, and also shut down. Like, last time I was in Minnesota, they had 13 inches. But like, oh, well, get your stuff out, and like, go to work, shut up. No, there's 13 inches of snow, no problem. 13 and 1 inch of snow shuts the land down. So, but anyway, that's just an obvious example. But so conservatives want government to be as close to the people that governs as possible. So even if you live in Northern Virginia, you can say that the government of Washington D.C. is culturally distant from you, even though it's geographically right next door. So right, so that it results in some very important differences. But we confuse conservative. We talk about there are people out there who call themselves conservative libertarians. That's really stupid. You can either be conservative or you can be libertarian. You can't be both. That's just stop. Just stop. Now, the main common cause in the Republican Party, and of course, political parties are sort of notionally ideological, but they're not very strict. Usually, although the Republicans try to be are very strict taskmasters, not necessarily in terms of ideology, but in terms of specific policies. If you don't toe the line in the Republican Party, they'll kick your ass out. The Democrats, to some extent, especially like on abortion rights, the Democrats don't have much patience for people who oppose abortion rights. But but other than that, there's a lot more disparity. That's part of the reason why the Democrats have this problem with these two, with Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin defying the party leadership and doing things that are pissing the party leadership off. When Republicans almost never have that problem because Republicans all march in lockstep. They just Republicans are basically automatons, which is more consistent with being conservative in some non-trivial sense. And liberals are like all over the place. It's a party. Okay, it's a stereo. But yeah. So it's hard to keep liberals in line and to keep conservatives in line. But so anyway, so Steve Bannon apparently doesn't like the Constitution anymore. And Devin Nunes, I don't know what came. Steve Bannon has been pretty clear that right. He said, the other thing is, he said, right, that the November 8th election day is going to be the end of the Biden administration. No, it's not. Stop. Although, and the other thing we need to talk about, maybe we'll talk about this next time, is this business of Christian nationalists. There's people talking about, Lauren Boebert out here talking about, oh, Jesus is coming back. Why would you run for office if Jesus is coming back? I think the authority of Jesus is a Jesus, the Christ is a fairy tale. Jesus did not, even if historical Jesus exists, he didn't come back to life 3 days after he died. That's a complete fairy tale. Stop with that. But if you, the notion of Jesus as Lauren Bubber is positive to Jesus, I think his authority would probably supervene Congress. I'm not really sure I understand why you want to serve in Congress if you got Jesus coming back. Ask Lauren Bubber. I, Christianity in general doesn't make any sense to me at all. It's complete philosophical nonsense. But then, of course, that's what you expect from Lauren Weber is complete philosophical nonsense. So anyway, I again have a book called "The GOP Will Not Govern." The GOP will not govern. You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from Barnes and Noble if you're not if you're not interested in purchasing anything from Amazon right now because they're busy having fires in their warehouses and firing people for objecting to the fires in their warehouses and then that engaged in that long running battle with that new attempt to unionize at Amazon. If you don't like Amazon, go to Barnes and Noble. It's available at Barnes and Noble again. The GOP will not govern. William B. Turner. It explains how it is that Republicans are no longer interested in actually governing the country. They only run for office because they like the perks, they like the prestige, and they like the attempts to enrich themselves. This has been going on at least since Ronald Reagan. It got a lot worse than Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich is the cause of our hyperpartisanship now. He's the one who set off the partisan firebombs in Congress. For no, I mean it's hard to discern exactly what his reasoning was. Why did what he did? I can't explain that, but I can explain how it happened. And so, if you're interested in that question, please buy my book, "The GOP Will Not Govern," available online from Barnes and Noble and Amazon.com. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye bye. Thank you.